Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Global Day of Testimony with JRoots, a full day of programming for Yom HaShoah, and together with 70 partner organizations from across the Jewish world. At the center of our day for Yom HaShoah have been the survivors, but the opportunity that we have now is a little bit different because we often talk about the Holocaust survivors as a single layer of identity. And what we're going to do this evening is to explore the various layers beyond someone just being a survivor. And we're delighted to welcome Dr. Giselle Cycowicz to be with us tonight to share some of her story. But we're so used to sharing stories of survivors and hoping that when they finish their testimony, there's going to be a few minutes at the end for the postscript, that which happened after 1945, that which happened in terms of building their lives and in terms of building the families and what they went on to do until today. And tonight is going to be the absolute opposite. I can tell you that Dr. Giselle Cycowicz is a Holocaust survivor, that she was born in Khust in the Carpathian Mountains, that she survived Auschwitz, was liberated from a Nazi camp in May of 1945. But with that, we'll stop telling the story of Dr. Giselle Cycowicz and the Holocaust, and we're going to pick up the story from liberation onwards, from everything that happened afterwards, because it is no less significant. And in terms of, as we come to the end of Yom HaShoah, to be able to think about that which not just the Holocaust survivors, but in particular Giselle has achieved as a psychologist, as a mother, a grandmother, an Ola Chadasha, an immigrant to Israel, all of those various layers of her identity is what we're going to do tonight with some of the questions that we'll ask. And we're delighted to be welcoming people watching on Facebook, on YouTube, here in the Zoom as well. Those of you here in the Zoom, please feel free to write your questions in the chat and we can ask those of Giselle as well. So Giselle, thank you very much for joining us towards the end of Yom HaShoah. And we said we're starting in May of 1945. What was your day of liberation? Can you tell us what it was to realize that you were liberated, what that meant, what that felt like?
Yes. You sound like you expect there to be a joyous kind of day on the day of liberation. And many people approached me for hearing my story of liberation because they didn't want to hear Tzoros anymore, but they wanted to hear something joyful, something good. And it wasn't it at all. Okay? So let me tell you what happened. We had been the camp where we were until almost the end of the war was a camp, a labor camp where we worked in a factory working on spare parts for airline equipment. And we were girls from age 14, 13, 14, 15, until about 35. 200 girls who marched an hour every day to work, and in snow, in sleet, in rain, in terrible cold, and then worked 12 hours straight across, and then ran quickly to get our coats, which were not really coats, and run out because the next shift was coming in, and they had to hang their coats. And it was sometimes very critical, that minute in which we had to catch our coats and run. So, and then we got home in a terrible cold. The place was never heated, and we never had heat, and we suffered terribly from the cold. But then, toward the end of the 7 months that we worked in this factory, we were moved. The 200 girls were moved because Hitler, the Nazis, just ended up their war in Russia. They gave up on it, and he was running, they were running, the Germans were running, and the Russians were running after them, down from the Ukraine, down, 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 and then across to Poland, and under the road toward Germany, running. And the Russians military was running after them. And the Allied forces were coming, can you imagine, down on Poland, onward, westward to Germany. And from Germany on, the Allied forces were coming from the west. And the Russian military was coming from the east. And they were closing Hitler in. And our camp was somewhere maybe 20, 30 kilometers south to Czechoslovakia. 1 minute, I must.
Bless you.
Excuse me.
Labreut.
And so the Germans decided to move us, our camp, the 200 girls, westward, because they, in case Hitler has to defend himself from these closing in forces, he might have to defend himself, and the war and the battle may break out just here, very close to where we were, and the Germans didn't want to risk us now to a war. So they put us into 2 or 3 trucks, very low, into the back of trucks, where there was a wall about this high, and we were all squeezed to the sides. And it was frightening that we might fall over the side of these trucks. But we were okay, and we were traveling. And we went for a few kilometers and found a camp of other Jewish, Hungarian Jewish women, where I found my cousin. And that's where we stayed. That's where they decided to leave us. The place was called Marisch Weißwasser.
And tell us, Giselle, because I'm mindful of making sure that we can talk about your life afterwards. You were there on the day of liberation. From the morning,
about a week before, and we went into work once or twice, and then the day of the liberation came, And it was a beautiful May day, and we were just outside, and it was sunny and beautiful, and suddenly we hear whistling. Whistling means line up for roll call. And we run outside to line up. This time we are 320 girls, not 200, because we found 120 here. And we line up, we start lining up out in the field, and then suddenly we hear a speaker phone and SS calling out, "No need to line up, just stay with the way you are." And so we straightened out, and there are 320 girls here line up, and what we see in front of us is a line of SS, maybe around 30, I don't believe more than that. And we look at them and they look at us, and then the man with the speaker starts to talk and says, "Today is May the 8th, 1945. Today, the war was declared over, and you are free, and you may do whatever you want to. You may go wherever you want to. And we were asked to stay here with you, to watch you until the Russian army arrives. And because we are staying here only to care for you, to care for your safety, we hope that you won't do any harm to us." That's it. Liberation. And we're standing there, limp, very limp. Our arms, our faces, just hanging down. And I am thinking to myself, this is like a mono thinking, totally. And I say, am I smiling? Am I singing? Am I saying hallelujah? If not, why not? This is a moment that I've been waiting for 6 years. The war started 6 years ago, and we went through an awful lot. And why is it that I cannot even smile? Nothing. I just don't feel like smiling. It is not joy for me. And I said, I must be crazy, but maybe the other girls are more normal than I am. And I look at them and I don't see any more joy, simcha in them than I saw in myself. Why not? This is it. We have no leaders. I am 17. And who is going to take me any place? And where on earth do I want to be now? Can I want to go home, back to the Goyim? That was my question. I should want to go back to the Goyim, who did not give us a bit of warmth or care or thinking, where they had been living for generations with us. Their kids went to school with us. And no one ever came over to us privately or publicly and said, "I'm so sorry for what you have to go through." Not only that, but they emptied my house while still we were looking on. They robbed our houses, all our houses, while we looked on. It was the most brutal thing.
Tell me, Giselle, when you, on that day of liberation, and I think that it's very important for everybody watching, as exactly as you said, to understand that there was no joy, there was no music, there was no great celebrations. How long did it take you to start to think about what the future would bring? How long after liberation was it that you started to really think about what next, what life might bring?
Years. Somewhere in the back of our minds, of course, we were thinking. But, the situation was so dire. We couldn't think. It wasn't possible to think of a place where you can put your head down and somebody will think of you and somebody will plan with you to do something in the future. There was no one such person. No one. So what happened was that Czechoslovakia, we were on the border of Czechoslovakia. We were on the Polish side of the border. There were Czech people, Moravian people on the other side. And one day they sent over horses and buggies. They were mamash on the other side of the border, and they sent horses and buggies to fetch us and bring us over to their village, which was called by the same way. In Poland, it was called German, Mährisch Weißwasser, and the other side was called Moravská Bílá Voda, which is in Czech, Mährisch Weißwasser. And so we went gladly over, and they gave us immediately a building, a sports building, which is a Sokol building, where British war prisoners, German war prisoners, were kept in that Sokol building, but they were sent home the minute they made peace, the minute they settled the war, they were sent home to England. The place became empty, and the Czech people gladly gave us that place to go into. They were very worried about these Jewish girls, prisoners of Germany. They were afraid of the Russian army. And so they wanted us over to them.
Tell me, Giselle, I know that there was a journey in order to get back to try and meet some of the members of your family. After the war, which of the members of your family did you find, did you reunite with?
If you let me tell it how it happened, there will be a surprise in it. Okay, so I prefer to say it in that way. We decided to go home after all. We had to get home to find whoever there was. There was my sister who was caught the day Germans came in and put into a concentration camp, a Hungarian concentration camp. And there was, of course, my father, who was separated from us in Auschwitz. First day we arrived in Birkenau, and he was taken to a coal mine and kept there for 5 months to work in a coal mine and delivered back to Auschwitz 5 months later, 200 Jewish prisoners after having worked for 5 months, and they had no flesh on their body. They wore this Auschwitz uniform, the striped uniform, and they were brought back into the gypsy camp in Birkenau, where my father came out of the gypsy camp, came over to the sea camp where we had been, and called a girl over to the electric wire, and he stood on the other side, and he said, "Can you please tell me whether there are any women from Hust still left in the sea camp?" And the girl said smilingly, "I can tell you because I am also from Hust and I am here." So the man said to her, "Well, then do me a favor, go over to those women and tell them that today 200 Jewish men were brought back from having worked 5 very difficult months in the coal mines, and that we were brought back, and there are 200 Hungarian men, and 20 of them are from Hust. I am also from Hust, and my name is Wolf Friedman. He is my father. And tomorrow we will not be here anymore." That was my father. Isru Chag Simchat Torah. Okay? We were going home. We didn't know about my father. We decided to walk home 600 kilometers by foot, by lousy, broken shoes, old shoes. We didn't have anything better. We were walking home because there were no trains, no buses, nothing, no vehicles. We arrived at the border of Karpatalus, where our home had been before, and that's where we found the first train, because Ukraine had still trains. And we got into the train, and we were not far from Hust. We traveled about 2 hours, and we stopped at a town called Kirai Haza, which was a junction of trains. The train stopped, the doors opened, a train stopped on the opposite track, and the train had just arrived there from direction of Hust. And that was very important for me. So I got down, the doors opened, and I looked into every door of every cabin to see whether I see people who are familiar. I didn't find anyone in the first few trains. One of the next ones, I stop in and look inside, and suddenly from a corner, someone calls out to me, "Wer bist du?" in Yiddish, "Who are you?" And then he gets up and I see his face and I say to him, "I will tell you who I am, but I want to tell you first that I know who you are. You are Mr. Heinfeld from Hust." He says, "Yes, yes, but who are you?" And I said, "My father is Wolf Friedman." He says, "Your mother is at home." Now, this was my mother. He came out, he brought out all the stuff with which he traveled, because he wanted to accompany us home to find with us my mother, because he knew it wouldn't be easy to find her. We did not know about my father. We did not at all know about it. But we were in Hust. We found my mother, thank God. It was the biggest nest and the biggest matana from Hashem that he did, that he gave us back, our mother. We stayed there in somebody else's house. I would like to tell you what we found in our house, because it wasn't possible to live in it. Can I?
Yeah,
We
of
were,
course.
my mother was, I cannot tell you how joyful she was. And after a few days, my sister, who was caught on the day when the Germans came in and put into the concentration camp, she came back too. So now my mother and her 3 children were back together. And we were wondering, we had to get out of Hus because it was under Russia, under the communists, and we didn't want to stay there. And there was the Iron Curtain. So we hired a person and we were brought over to Romania, which was still relatively free. That was a town, a famous town, Satu Mare, where the Satmara Rebbe was from. And we had relatives there. And we stayed there for a while, but we decided together that we cannot live under with Goyim together. And we have to go to live among Jews, which meant living in Germany, but with Jews. We had rooms from Germans, German population had to give us rooms to stay. And we were together most of the time with all the Jewish kids, the young people who were liberated from camps but could not go home.
Giselle, I really want to make sure that we get to all of your achievements in life many years after the war. I know that you had family members who were in the United States, who they managed to find each other and call for you and to send papers to Europe in order to bring you to America. Could you tell us the day that you arrived in the United States? What did you feel when you first saw the shores of America?
Well, it was very bittersweet, because our papers were given to us by somebody who was learning in the yeshiva of my grandfather. My mother grew up in a Rav's home. And I had a cousin from Europe, from Karpatalus, whose father was a shaykhid, and he couldn't make a living in America. So they sent him off to in Europe. So they sent him off to America, and he became a shechter in America, and he made a decent living, and he was coming home periodically to bring home to the family and to be with his wife. And 1948, he brought back with him his oldest son, settled him down in New York. And he went straight back because it was 1939, the war broke out, and he went to gather his wife and 4 non-married children to bring them back to America. But he only reached Budapest, the office of what do you call
Embassy.
it? The embassy in Budapest. It was probably the best place to be hidden, to be hidden for a Jew, persecuted Jew then. And they were there and everything was fine. And one day, God dropped a bomb on the American embassy in Budapest, and the 6 people were killed. My aunt and uncle and cousins. And the son was still in America, devastated. And the son one day on Shabbos, after the war, went into a shul on the Lower East Side, and the Jew sits down next to him, and he says to the Jew, "Fin vikim tagoy, fin vikim taid." Where is a man, Jew coming from? That's the style of asking a question of a stranger in a shul. And he says he comes from Svaljevo. And then my cousin sends to him, Duvad Leib is his name. He says to him, "Well, I am a grandchild of the Svaljevo roof. So am I." So the man says, "Very nice. I went to the yeshiva with the Svaljevo roof." And my cousin says, "Well, if so, then I have to tell you that she's alive with her 3 children. She survived the Shoah." So he says, "What? Hannah the roof's daughter Hannah? She's my mother, and she's alive." So she says, "Yes, she's alive with 3 children." So he says, "Then we must bring her to America." And he sent us papers. By that time, 2 of my sisters were married, and so he had to send papers to my 2 brothers-in-law and my 2 sisters and my mother and me. And they did. And the girls didn't get married officially, so they didn't change their names. And each one of the members of our family were given proper papers. And my mother is very geschickt. She's very smart in these things. She would come. We were living on the border of Germany in a Czech town called Cheb, C-H-E-B. And my mother would come to Prague, where I would be studying, and take care of the things in the embassy with doctors, with whatever she needed to do. And my sisters were living at that time in Cheb. So my mother came, and one of the last days when my mother took care of papers, and actually took care of our papers, the 3 girls' papers, got ready today. And in the middle of the night, we got a telephone. My sister, who was married and pregnant 3 months, died. Just up and died. Got a stroke. She was 3 months pregnant. It was a terrible catastrophe. We went back to Cheb, crying the whole way about my sister, Miskina. And we were back, and he had a stroke. And a short time after, the Jewish agencies, the big Jewish organization, gave out a holler, a yell. Everyone whose papers are finished, go right away to America. We have an aeroplane ready for you. Just call out and you can go right away. Don't lose this opportunity. Okay. For my sister, it was horrible to leave her husband alone in a field a large field with 3 people buried in it, because the old cemetery was full and she had to leave him. Anyway, we went. We had $100 between the 3 of us together to come to a new world. Okay, not a change of clothes, nothing. $100. We went. My cousin, God bless his memory, was there to receive all the young survivors, all his cousins from every side. He received us. It was wonderful. We were there, but it was very hard to be there without mother and without my husband, sister's husband. But in the meantime, from Israel, the war broke out, and the military sent people to enlist Holocaust survivors to the war, for the war. My brother-in-law gladly went to Israel. My mother stayed alone, without her children, without the baby, without being able to help with the baby. And what happened with us was, we lived in a terrible slum for $20 a month rent. And people would come to us, Holocaust survivors, who knew us, who knew our names or who knew us. And they came on Motzei Shabbat, and we were talking in Hungarian, and we were talking about home, and we filled each other with love. And one day my sister got a job as a maid. We weren't allowed to work. She worked as a maid, and we were happy to have some income. And so one day my sister comes home from her job, and she says, we found a solution for mother, how to come here. We find a young man, not a young man, somebody who is not married, who's an American citizen. And he's willing to get married to my mother and bring her over, fictitiously. But it will cost $1,000. And we burst out laughing. $1,000? When will we ever be able to pay this back? What kind of joke is this on us? And one of the people who came to visit us every Motzei Shabbos says, I will give you the $1,000. If there is a mother and no ties attached, no strings attached, if you can pay it back, you'll pay me back. If you can't, you won't. But if there is a mother left alive, she has to be with her children.
Giselle, can I ask you, this way of bringing your mother to America, you describe having nothing, your sisters walking around with $20, $100 in your pocket between you. What drove you and your fellow survivors with literally with nothing to be able to succeed? How did you do it? What was your secret?
We accepted it. We couldn't avoid a situation like that. Somebody offers us $1,000 and we don't have to accept it if we will not be able to. We trusted our honesty. We were decent people. And we knew that we will try the best. And let me tell you the end. My mother came and she made such a transformation in our life. First of all, she said, this is where you want to live, a place that didn't have heat in New York, a place that didn't have, it was a terrible slum. She went over immediately, didn't speak any English. She went to Borough Park, went to the Rav of Hust, our Rav, and she told him what situation we are in. And he says, come to Borough Park. I have a stable here. You can daven in my shir. There are plenty of Nitzorei Shoah here. You'll stay here, you'll get work. You will be fine. And we did it. And we went. My mother got an apartment of some 5 rooms. She immediately rented out 2 rooms. She began taking care. The baby was born, a little girl. She was very joyed about it. She took over the baby and the household and the money and sent us all to work. By now we were allowed to work. We started working. In a short time, we paid out the $1,000. And I can tell you that until the man lived and his wife here, he married, and until his wife worked, my sister was always, we came to Israel on Aliyah, but we were always close to her, helping her out. And I felt that we did our best getting this gift and paying for it in kind.
Wow.
And my mother ran to work in that first summer in a boys' camp to cook. She was a short woman, small, overworked. She was not yet 50 years old. She carried big pots in a boys' camp and cooked. And she said, I want to earn my money. I don't want to get money from anyone. I want to live for my children.
Giselle, I think that you describe in your family an exceptional work ethic, a sort of a persistence and resilience to take care of yourselves. Now, you have something that probably most of the people watching here don't have, which is the word doctor before your name. Now, we know that your schooling, your education was cut short, and you've just described the most difficult beginning to restarting your life with literally nothing and having to put everything back together. How did you become Dr. Giselle Cycowicz despite everything?
Yes. My education was cut off at age 12 when the Hungarians came in. The Czechoslovakia fell apart. So Hungary occupied us. And the first thing they did, they called out kids back to school. I was the only one in the family who was still in school. And I went and I sat down and I was waiting for the teacher. First thing that happened, somebody sent me a little, what do they call it? A little crumpled up paper in my bag. And it fell, I picked it up, and it says, "Death to the Jews." It says 1939, "Death to the Jews." Okay? So I didn't say anything because we heard anti-Semitic statements all along my life. I knew that it existed. And then the teacher came in and she welcomed this group of people who were Jewish people and Ukrainian people and Hungarian people, all kinds. And we had a Hungarian culture. My mother tongue was Hungarian. And she said, welcome, and now we learn Hungarian, how nice, how beautiful. And then she says, but where are the Jewish kids here? And she raises her hands and we stand up. And there are the kids, girls and boys without kippah and with pairs. They came from a cheder where they had gone since they were 6 years old, 3 years old, and since they were 6, they had to come from the cheder to the class and study in school. Okay? And very nice. And it went well, no problem. Kids who had worn kippas but weren't allowed to wear them in the class. And then the teacher says, okay, kids, there's a door. Do you see the door there? Please walk all out of there, the Jewish kids, because there is no more learning to the Jewish children. Okay? And we left. And it was sad for us.
How long did it take you until you were back in full-time education? That was during the war. How long did it take?
30 years later.
And what did you start studying 30 years later?
No. 1948, we arrived in America. I didn't speak a word of English. Words I know English, but I didn't speak English. I remember having read one book, wonderful book. I still recommend it. This was 60 years ago. It was called The Birth of a Nation, and it was the story written by a Guatemalan ambassador to the UN, who was part, excuse me, I must sneeze. I'm sorry.
Gesundheit.
Guatemalan ambassador to the United Nations, who was part of the process of establishing the land of Israel. And he's a very good friend of Israel. It was a very, very wonderful book to read. Very, really. And when I finished reading the book, I knew how to speak English. And I went to work out to the seashore to a hotel to be a cleaning lady there for the rooms in the hotels. And once I saw an advertisement that the education department is giving a test in what's it called? High school equivalency examination. I had no idea what that meant. I mean, that kind of fancy words I didn't learn yet. But somebody explained to me that this is a test to get me into college. So I went to take the test. And I remember that when we were walking, and it was given in the place where I was, Long Beach, Long Island. I didn't learn at all American history, and I wasn't ready to learn American history, but I needed to know something. So as we were walking into the test, there's a black guy, a real American black young man, and I say to him, excuse me, is it right? Is it true that George Washington was the first American president? And he says, yes, I think yes. I said, thank you. And that's all I know about American history, that George Washington was the first. And I went and took it and passed it the first time. Fairly well, fairly good scores. And I had this in my hand. And then I had 3 children. I got married, and I had many years ago. It took a while. And I had 1 child. I married an Israeli guy who was an engineer and worked here in the military industries. He developed the Uzi gun by himself. He studied in, my husband studied in Technion engineering. And he graduated and he became an engineer and he entered this military industries. And 5 years later, he came to America just to learn what the world is like. And there he met me. And he married me. And we spoke Hebrew, and we spoke Hebrew with the kids. And we sent them to very Zionist schools. And thank God, everything went right. But women, married religious women, did not go to school while they had kids at home who were not in school. So that I was in school. I had a big career before I got married, because in the labor camp, I was taught drafting, and I developed this beautifully. And then I went to Israel on a Sochnut exchange program, Jewish agency exchange program, where I worked for the electric company as a designer and as a mechanical designer. And they were very happy with me, thank God. And then I went back and I got married. And I had 3 children by then, an 11-year-old and a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old. And when I had a 3-year-old, I took him, Zavi, the only boy, and I took him to a what do you call that? A school for little kids, Cheder. I sent him to a Cheder, and that was 3, and went straight from there with my high school equivalence examination and registered for a psychology program. And it was a wonderful thing for me, wonderful. And I started studying, and I went through the bachelor's with a lot of exemption examinations. They just gave me tests, and I took them in the school, or they gave me books and said, read them, and then you'll take a test. I didn't want to spend. I was already, I don't know, in my 50s probably, somewhere. And I got my bachelor's, and there was, at that point, for the sake of the Black people and people who didn't have a chance to study well, they had a program, BA, PhD. I pick up somewhere in the middle a master's degree, but I can go straight from a bachelor's to a PhD. And everybody said, I'm never crazy, because I have 3 children and a husband and a household and friends. And I had a lot of work to do, but I did it. And then I started working in New York in an excellent program with a frum Jew who was a doctor. He was my boss. And I worked for the New York Telephone Company as the single psychologist working for the New York Telephone Company, who had 95,000 employers. And I was the only psychologist. And my boss, the medical centers I worked in 2 medical centers in Brooklyn and in New York. And they were very happy, and he sent me a recommendation. Then I came to Israel. 7 years I worked there, and then he sent me tremendous recommendations. And I got a job. I tried a job with the telephone company, but there was some bureaucratic hurdle. So I didn't go, but somebody told me to go to Amcha. Amcha is an organization, probably the only one who exclusively got developed to help Holocaust survivors psychologically. And I got the job right away. And somebody sent me there, and they said, they will accept you right away. And I did. And when they accepted me, I spoke Hebrew. That was not a problem. And when I asked him, and what can I talk about? What may I talk about with the Holocaust survivors? Because in America, I had a psychiatrist, a psychotherapist. He never once, for 2 years, I went to him twice a week. He never asked me a word about the Shoah. And he knew he was Jewish, he was a religious Jew. And he knew I was, but he didn't ask me. And when I suddenly burst out because I saw a movie, The Man in the Glass Booth, about Eichmann Strayer. And when I came to the psychiatrist and I vomited out Auschwitz, once after the other, I just couldn't stop talking about it. And when I did it the third time, he said, stop. And he said, if I did not answer you, it wasn't because I didn't know what to say. I just felt for the sake of treatment, you'd be better off if I didn't. And therefore, I asked the man who hired me to treat Holocaust survivors. And I said, what may I talk to them about? And he said, Hakol mutar. I had the whole world in my hands. And
Giselle, I think that your work that you did since coming to Israel with the Holocaust survivors and with Amcha, it's a chapter in and of itself. And I know I'm mindful that we're coming towards the end of our hour together, and maybe we'll make time for another session just to talk about what it was that you, as a Holocaust survivor, being a psychologist for Holocaust survivors, what you've shared from that. I think that anyone who's joining us and the people joining us from all over the world tonight have seen someone who's suffered greatly, but is an overachiever. The person who's mother to 3 small children, getting her BA, PhD, everything all at the same time, and someone who infuses sort of positivity. I think the last time you spoke to a JRoots group was just before Purim, and you were getting ready for Purim Suda and all of the positivity there. If we just can close with maybe 2 minutes of how do you find such a source of joy and positivity today?
I'm glad that you noticed it, because I feel that life is not worthwhile if we are grouching all the time. And I know that there are always some hidden things to that positivity, that there are days when you are grouching. But in general, I find life so life is full of gifts to the person who really wants to live it. I find life so pleasant. First of all, I love studying, learning new things. And once you have something to learn about, I am very grateful. The most grateful now for a grandson who is Yael's son, who is 25, and he just finished his army, and he's finishing a year of Machina because he wants to study something big in Hebrew University. And he came back from the army full of desires to go and study. He never was a student, But now all he wants is to study. It's wonderful, and he wants to help me. And every day there was something that he sent me over the line or online, that he brought me a course, a college course of anti-Semitism. He's the best professors from Tel Aviv University. A course, a whole course in Zionist history, a modern Jewish, modern Israeli history. He brought me Rabbeim, and he brought me all kinds of people to listen to. And I feel I've gained so much. I mean, life is really beautiful if somebody wants to do it. I'm very glad to do it. I have some patients whom I take on privately without pay. And it's wonderful for me to practice still my skill, because I cannot remember what I did to make people feel better. So I have to try it again. And I don't know. I have no answer to that.
I think you answered it exceptionally. And if the people watching and the people who have the opportunity to hear you can take even a small part of your drive and thirst for knowledge, and to know that you're still working and still seeing patients, and that you're blessed with children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and grandchildren who will come and bring you things to study during the lockdown, then to see someone who really appreciates everything that they have, and hopefully everyone who shared this evening with us, to see what it is from liberation onwards. And we understand that it has not been easy, and the challenges have been great, but somebody like yourself who's managed to hold it together and to really to build a great family, just be the matriarch of an empire, is something that hopefully should take us forward as we head out of Yom HaShoah and the Global Day of Testimony into next week, into the next chapter of Jewish history of Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut. So really, on behalf of everybody who's been here tonight, a big thank you to Dr. Giselle Cycowicz, and any of the other programming from the Global Day of Testimony you can watch on YouTube and Facebook, and it's all available for you to take part of. Thank you very much, Dr. Cycowicz.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Really, that you brought it out in me. I thank you, all of you.